welcome to my first ever media evaluation question for A2, which is going to answer the question how I use, developed and challenged conventions of real media text. Oh, that's a mouthful. For my production, which was a 5-minute long short film, and my 2 ancillaries, which was a double-page spreads for a magazine review of my film and a short film poster. Now, one of the most popular dating sites out there currently is Tinder. And I, being an 18-year-old girl, I'm actually quite a fun fan of Tinder. I find it, quite cool. It's not cool, it's desperate. So I decided to incorporate it into my question. Well, I made my own Tinder, okay? I made my own Tinder. And basically, I'm either going to swipe left to challenge a convention, swipe right to use a convention, and super to develop a convention of a real media text that I use in my productions. So I typically looked at 3 different genres of film for my main production. One of which was the romance genre, to influence the small part, the 1.5 minute long part of my film that was based on romance and homosexual relationships. I also used, developed and challenged conventions of the drama genre and the short film genre. So looking at the short film genre, the first convention we have is length. And this convention is typically that short films are 5 to 10 minutes long. Now because of my brief that I was set for A2, the time restriction was around 5 minutes. I did find that 5 minutes was the perfect length because it allowed me to develop a bit of a narrative, but at the same time I was still making sure I didn't include things that weren't relevant, Every moment was kind of a lot more impactful and relevant rather than dragging out a storyline for an hour and a half. So I guess my first convention, which is length, I will be swiping right. It's a match! Convention number 2 is the budget of a short film. Now, short films are typically not trial films, but they are used to show people's skill. So because, again, an 18-year-old girl, I don't have a lot of money. I'm not gonna lie, I'm trying to save to go to places and do things like university. So yeah, I had to be really, really resourceful with my mise-en-scène. My equipment, I had the basic equipment like a tripod and a camera, but my school actually just bought a gimbal, which was really, really useful for my tracking shots. My actors, I had to just ask for favours and, do stuff in return. You can tell that my film is low budget because, there isn't a large acting variety. The equipment isn't especially high quality, it's kind of standard. But it doesn't look bad for a 0 budget film. I don't think it looks bad. So again, I will be swiping right on this convention. And I'll be using the convention of 0 budgets. Convention number 3! Convention number 3 is a twisted plotline or ending. I'm actually going to super like this convention and develop it. Because short films usually run for a tiny fraction of the time a standard film does, the plotline has to be much more condensed and gripping. We, as viewers, don't get to see a full character development and usually are left on cliffhangers, so we expect or want a sequel. I'll be super liking this convention, meaning I developed it when considering the plotline in my own short film. I decided I love the concept of using a plot twist at the end of the film, however I like to think of the interest curve as that of a camel, kind of. So the scene where my main older lady character Arya dies is obviously the main peak in my film, but I decided to use a second interest peak in the final minute of my short film where Arya sees the rose used to symbolise her own death in ivory cage, which she finds in a box at the start. I then decided to resolve the issue almost, where Arya leaves the birdcage back in the box and walks away. So I have developed this convention of short films using the idea of a slight interest peak towards the end, around the point I wanted to convey about dementia and trauma. So yeah, that's how I developed the convention of the twisted plot lines. So I'll now be moving on to the rather iconically romance genre and how this influenced my film and how I used, developed and challenged conventions from the romance genre. I'm saying the same thing about 1 million times, but it's all okay. Okay. Convention number 1 of the romance genre is heterosexual lovers. So, one of the most ingrained perceptions of love in classic romance films is this ideal of boy meets girl. Most romance films, even short films with romance influences on them, have heterosexual lovers, which is fine except that anything outside of this heterosexual bubble is another genre of film. Even on one of the most popular streaming sites, which is Netflix, there's a special category for homosexual or gay films, which is just really not needed, in my opinion. So I'll be swiping left to challenge this one, because after analysing many romance short films, I wanted to change my initial idea about how I wanted to represent love, so that I could actually say something important in as little as 5 minutes. My original screenplay was modelled around the short film Me to You, where a man and woman's love story folds out from a singular overhead shot of his bedroom, changing the mise-en-scène over and over again to show like the passing of time. I was going to use myself and my boyfriend at the time to film this. We broke up, spoiler alert. I decided to change the scene showing Arya as a teenage girl, so I took to rewriting my screenplay, using 2 female actors and a bench to show a gradual love story from one perspective, one shot, the same long shot, challenging the conventions of love films but still using some of them so that I can kind of, if this makes sense, fit my film into a genre but challenge the conventions of homosexual love to say something about it. I also use titles before the scene starts to show a quote from the Bible, which implies homosexuality is a skit. I also use the titles before the scene starts to show a quote from the Bible, which implies that homosexuality is a sin. I decided to challenge this convention because I really don't like how one-sided love is shown to be, even in modern day films. Convention number 2 of the romance genre is symbols of love. Even though I challenge typical conventions of romance short films, I love the idea of having this synergy in my film, so I use the rose to signify the love that the lover gives to Arya. I manipulated my mise-en-scène and plotline to be revolving around this rose after it's given to Arya, as it signifies that even though Arya's love was unrequited, it's still the most prominent memory through her haze of dementia. As the final part of swiping for my Ivory Cage production, I'll be looking at conventions of drama short films, as Ivory Cage has elements of this genre too. I like to think of my film as a Frankenfilm, if you will. It has a bunch of different genres kind of thrown into it, and it makes this really cool film, you know, short film. That's what short films essentially are. They're experiments. They're little things that you do that just, you know, show your talent and stuff, and I love that. My Frankenfilm, that's the name I should have used, Frankenfilm. Convention number 1 of the drama genre is using relatable AF situations that are based on real life experiences, and that's in order to relate to an audience as well. Ivory Cage flips between a rather realistic and almost documentary-like, showing the severity of dementia, and the really unrealistic, where Arya sees into the past and have a glimpse of her own death by overdosing. I wanted to show dementia in a new light in my 5-minute production, but in hindsight it just isn't achievable to do on a zero-budget amateur film. I developed the convention of using real-life situations as I was also combining the drama genre with an art house short film, therefore creating a blend between the two using heavy editing techniques that allow Arya to look into the photos and see her own past, but also evidence in real life situations and real life issues, because I think it isn't spoken about enough, you know? The drama genre, whilst yes, it is dramatic, it is overly saturated, it's still programs like Hollyoaks, EastEnders, you know, Coronation Street, or even short films, drama short films like Removed, which is about, you know, an orphan girl who gets moved from house to house to house to house. Or she's not an orphan actually, she just, she has a lot of family problems, sorry. Anyway, all of these drama short films, they all speak about issues that are relatable to the viewers, and the viewers can kind of not just empathise with, but if we look at the uses and gratifications theory or something that we're currently doing in the exam, it's evident that like people watch dramas for a reason, and that is typically to feel like there is a resolution to what they are going through. And so even though there's obviously no resolution to dementia, by Arya kind of showing what it's really like, I think a lot more people can understand why she's like this. You know, yeah, dementia is a horrible, horrible mental illness. It is. And I empathise a lot with people who go through this. And I really wanted to say something that was like, you know, it's really crappy. But people are here for you. Convention number 2 of the drama genre is intense social interaction. Oh, this one's a good one. I used very little dialogue in Ivory Cage as I wanted the scoring and the non-diegetic sound I used to really take centre stage. With this one, I challenged this convention as I wanted to represent dementia as being isolating and very focused on the individual rather than building relationships. I did this by only using dialogue when Aria is much younger, building a relationship with a piano teacher. I then used some conventions of silent films in the romance sequence, having no dialogue, but a soundtrack playing over my two characters miming the words. Like a normal conversation, but the soundtrack was playing so you can't hear what they're saying, basically. Reflecting on my production in terms of whether challenging this convention worked, I found that I liked the challenge it offered to the drama genre as I made a human interest story so much more, allowing my audience to have a window into dementia as a whole, rather than just one synthetic character that can't be fully developed in 5 minutes. I think if I would have had more time in my short film, I probably would have used more social interaction and kind of given maybe Aria a carer or a best friend rather than a love interest. But because I have a Franken film and I'm combining loads of different genres of film, I found that sticking to kind of this use of non-diegetic sound and making it more poetic actually really worked in the film's favour. So we're going to move on to my magazine double page spreads, my ancillary task, and how I use, challenge and develop conventions from that too. So convention number 1 for the magazine spread is quotes from reviewers or quotes from people who have watched your film. When I looked at my style models, I found that the quotes from the critiques was a really popular feature of a short film review. So I used 2 people from my audience feedback as quotes, the good bits obviously, and used a star rating type thing to show what they thought of it. I swiped right on this convention and it was a match. I used the quotes with some fancy sounding words like gripping that made my short film look pretty damn good in the review, and I found it worked really effectively, it looked really professional. Convention number 2 is the director's notes or comments. I really like the idea of having something where I, the sole creator of Ivory Cage, talked about the production even though I wrote the whole review. I decided to super like this convention and develop it. I had a column in my review where I asked the producer, me, questions and answered them, so I made my magazine review seem more professional and kind of like interviewer and reviewer type situation. I thought it worked really well, but some of my audience feedback commented that I should perhaps ask 3 questions and have like a short sweet box rather than a whole column, so I'll make that part of my improvements. So now we're going to move on to conventions of film posters. Convention number 1 is a big image in the background. I looked at a lot of style models because when I started the planning stage for this task I found I had no bloody clue what I wanted to make and do for my short film poster. After a lot of Google diving and Pinterest board making at 2 AM though, I found that I really loved this idea of having the birdcage as my focal point for the 3 tasks. So I found this film poster called Free Wings, and it had this big image of a bird cage. It wasn't like the one I've got, it was a lot more kind of like vintagey. And I found that I really liked that as a focal point, and it really pushed this like synergy, because I had it in my magazine spreads and my film as well, of this birdcage and birds and freedom, you know, the freedom that represents Aria's mind, but she doesn't know what to do with it. So I used a DSLR image of the birdcage and used the convention of having the big image. I found it worked really well in terms of composition, as the birdcage wireframe worked really well not to block the entire page, especially with the contrast of the black birds overlaid. I did this thing where I kind of like I cut out individually and layered and layered and layered all of my birds. So it was like this dispersion of them, which was a convention I found from the short film poster Birds. Upon reflection, I think I could have used a lot more conventions based on my own film genre, but because my film is a Franken film, I found that it has a lot of genres of different things, and one of which, in one scene, it has a lot of conventions of psychological thrillers. So I used a psychological thriller poster to influence what I was doing. It's almost intimidating having this flock of birds at the bottom kind of dispersing up, and with the contrast of this ivory cage, I thought it worked quite well. Yeah, so I will be swiping right on this convention, and it's definitely a match, you know. I am really working on these matches, man. Like, yeah, hell yeah. Convention number 2 is a film name in the big font at the bottom of the film poster page. Whilst on my search for titles and how I should manipulate the layout to work effectively with the birdcage image, I found that a lot of short film posters and film posters for romance films especially had the title at the bottom of the poster in a bold font. I decided to use a bold sans serif font but used Photoshop to make the title cut out of the black bird silhouettes that were dispersing but heavy at the bottom. Well, that concludes my rather interesting question 1 for you, and I really hope you enjoyed it. I made my own Tinder time with Tyler. My last name's Tyler, so you know, it rhymes, it works. So, thank you for watching. I've been your host, Tyler, hence the name Tinder Time with Tyler, for my question 1 evaluation question.